Today is the third day of this May 1983 7-day retreat. And the koan for today is number 38 from the Mumonkan, as presented by Zenke Shibayama in his comments on the Mumonkan. And the title of it is "A Buffalo Passes Through a Window." The case reads, Gosso was a teacher. Gosso said, to give an example, it is like a buffalo passing through a window. Its head, horns, and forelegs have all passed through. Why is it that its tail cannot? A buffalo passes through a window. Its head, its horns, its forelegs have all passed through. Why is it that its tail cannot? And the poem reads, if it passes through, it falls into a ditch. If it turns back, it is destroyed. This tiny tail, how extremely marvelous. Before doing some talking on this koan, or rather taking off from this koan, let's read a few of the comments by Shibayama, just a few sentences here and there picked from his longer commentary. Master Hoenn says, or Gosso, to give an example, it's like a buffalo passing through a window. Its head, horns, and forelegs have all passed through. It, Shibayama says, and puts it in quotation marks, it essentially has no name, no form. What in the world does the buffalo symbolize? What is it that is given the temporary name of a buffalo? And later he says, this huge tame buffalo leisurely passes through the window. Yet why is it that its tiny tail cannot pass through? With this extraordinary question, Master Hoenn cuts asunder all possible reasoning on the part of all the Zen students in the world. From olden times, this demand, why is it, has been greatly revered as the ultimate secret of Hoenn's Zen. In other words, it's the bleeding cry of compassion trying to eradicate the cause of human ignorance all at once. Why is it? Or what is it? Or who? Or mu? Or just questioning, attending, without knowing? Here knowing is to no avail. It's absurd. Try to figure out why a buffalo passes through but not the tail. You can't reason that one out. Or you can spend your life reasoning it out. Now tell me, says Shibayama, why is it that the tail cannot pass through the window? And then he says, this tale is nothing else than the formless form of reality. You may describe it, but in vain. Here he quotes a poem by Mumonkan. You may describe it, but in vain. Picture it, but to no avail. I think at this point Mumonkan adds, stop all your hankering and maneuvering. He leaves that out. He goes right on. When the world collapses, it is indestructible. It symbolizes the ever unnameable it. Alas, my explanation above is nothing more than a vain effort to play the ape, says Shibayama. And he says, Master Dogen has a poem commenting on this koan. This world is but the tail of a buffalo passing through a window. The tail is the mind, which knows neither passing nor not passing. Does he mean, says Shibayama, that there's no coming and going for the tail or mind, and that its going and returning takes place nowhere but where you are? Listen to Master Eisei, who first introduced Zen to Japan from China, when he speaks of the true mind that has no form. Quote, it is impossible to measure how high the sky is, yet the mind soars above it. It's impossible to fathom how deep the earth is, yet the mind plunges further than that. It is impossible to surpass the light of the sun and the moon, yet the mind goes beyond it. How boundless is this mind? And then he goes on later and says, now set aside philosophical interpretations and tell me, what is the tail that cannot pass through the window? You have to attain the answer experientially with your own body and soul. Soul and body. Since this is not a koan in which you're working by yourself, alone, we'll use it in a different way. And let me say at this point, the way we're commenting on koans is not necessarily or not the way one works if one works alone on one. Some people have said to me, if you talk about these koans, you're giving them away. There's nothing that is being given away or that can be given away. It's all there. It's neither mine nor yours. And we're not revealing any secrets. As one master said, what is secret is within you. Somehow or other, in reading and listening to this koan over and over, one gets the feeling this koan deals with the whole and with the many parts. The whole buffalo. If you ever stood near a buffalo, it's a big hole. It's enormous. It's like a mountain rising, sort of crooked. There's a huge head and mane with a tiny little sharp eye in there, almost hidden in the wool. Two little horns, and this massive body petering out, a very small hind end, and that tail. And usually a vast meadow land meadowland, he's grazing or she's grazing, the family, the little ones. Just read on this Western trip someplace that I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of buffaloes were killed when the white man wanted its parts. But now there are few coming back, and I don't know what some of them are raised for. I don't want to think about it. But grazing on the meadowland and this vast sky above, just slightly rolling hills, where are the parts? But this is what this koan directs us to, demands us to consider the whole and the parts. The whole being what maybe, if we put it into words, is the completeness, the utter completeness, the utter totality of all of life. Which one seems so incapable of apprehending, of seeing, of being. Because one is cut up into parts. Because oneself is cut up into parts, the world around one is equally cut up into parts. The most prominent part, maybe, within a human being is the discriminating, dissecting intellect, which has accomplished such amazing feats of technology by cutting apart the world, the earth. Again, if you travel through the West, particularly through the state of Colorado, there are mines everywhere. The mountains still, even though maybe 50 years ago, 100 years ago, the mountains still seem to be bleeding. Because once the silver was hauled out of the mine, the place was abandoned, and all the stuff that had been dug out is still rolling down the hill. Since it's so dry, vegetation grows so slowly, there are still these open wounds, which, if one looks at the part, one needs the silver for something or other, then one doesn't see the whole. One can't. What one does is right. There's always a little church nearby that sanctifies what is being done on Sundays, or sanctions. We already spoke about the almost total annihilation of the buffalo herds. When one needs oil, and one needs it if one is enclosed just in one problem, that of getting fuel for transportation, for lighting houses, which seems so right and so necessary, then one goes looking for oil. And the source of oil used to be the whales, so they were killed by the thousands. These gentle, huge animals that sing to each other under the water for miles. Now, as I saw recently on a documentary on whales, their song is interrupted by the boats the huge cruisers crisscrossing through the ocean that sort of stops the sound waves from traveling from whale to whale. And yet who are we to blame? If we need something and we're preoccupied with a part, and we go out and get it, and the one who needs is a part, is not whole, cannot see the whole. We have created fantastic things. One still thinks or sometimes sees in a museum these clumsy wooden solid wheels. And now there is a space shuttle. Coming in for a landing on a desert without impairment. Gathering all kinds of information, partly just to find out what's out there, but also to find out if we can carry on warfare beyond the limits of this earth. Imagine how absurd. We have created these nuclear weapons which can bring about almost total destruction. We as parts have created these parts. And maybe waking up a little bit to this impossible, possibly impending Holocaust, and then shivering in our boots because it may hit me and my family, my neighbors and my friends. I'm not caring so much about the people in the far west, east, north, or south. That's not quite my concern. I say it is, but it is not. My concern is here at home. So as a part, I join some kind of a movement, looking for a partial solution to a global problem, the global problem of human violence. It's not a partial problem, it's a global, it's a total problem affecting every human being and emanating from every human being, or almost every human being. Maybe there are some human beings in which there is no violence. None. So even though maybe we'll partially succeed to freeze a percentage of these bombs, it seems so absurd. Leaving enough so that everybody has still enough. Enough for what? And if we want to get rid of them, we don't know where to put them. Just saw the other day on a newscast how 4 states were proposed for dumping nuclear waste from electric plants, nuclear power plants. But understandably, each state refused to take that stuff. One was to be buried in the Canyonland National Park. People of Utah, an uproar over it. It's a partial solution to a total problem that nobody yet wants to look at, or very, very few people. And you have to look at that total problem in yourself and resolve it there first, as you go, so that you can see the wholeness of life, the wholeness of yourself, the seeing being the wholeness. and then understand what the work really is that needs to be done. Not partial work, but total work. So the discriminating, dissecting intellect, I don't want to use these words as judgmental or negative. Intellect also has created all kinds of beautiful, helpful things, houses, containers. One sociologist once said, in looking at cultural history and civilization, all one looks at the development of weapons or armament, but what about looking at the development of containers? That was a very interesting study, the development of containers to store things in, so that we may be free to do something. What? To do what? If we're free, our food is stored in our containers. They used to be beautifully woven. Today they're plastic, mostly, buckets. Bins. So what are we storing this stuff for? Because it really freed human beings to do something leisurely, to do something creative with their time, rather than constantly gathering and even eating as you're gathering, because the little things, the little wild things don't nourish very much, so you have constantly to gather, constantly to eat, like the chimps or the gorillas or these animals which almost constantly graze. Can't look up, only to see if there's a lion around to run away from. So for what have we freed our time? For entertainment? That's mostly it. Coming back to the intellect, which has its place in all the capacities of the human being, has its very significant place, but it is totally overrated by our schools and the parents that go along with it. Now I read that the attempt is being made to already train the intellect of 2-year-olds. Have you read it? I just saw the picture. I couldn't even read the article in Newsweek or Time. A little toddler being trained to run a computer, was it? I didn't read it. It's funny, but it is incredibly tragic to start stuffing this little vacant mind, which is still free to see, to look, to test, to smell and chew and enjoy, with facts and with information, with dead stuff. Pack it, train it. So when he or she gets to school, she is already what? No more free time. Just having been with a 2.5-year-old, it is amazing how a 2.5-year-old goes outside. He never wants to come in. You have to trick him to come in. Everything is outside. Butterflies and ants and grass and wind and little inclinations in the road and slopes downhill. And everything is tested and done and enjoyed and shared with a look and done over and over. eating is of absolutely secondary importance there. And yet already 2.5-year-olds are slated for school. With whom? Who are the teachers, tell me? Whole? With a feeling for with a yearning for wholeness in themselves and therefore in the children, and therefore maybe working on that, or just focusing with their intellect on the kids' intellect? Because in, I guess, the picture on Time or magazine, Newsweek magazine, was a little child with a cello, I think. I remember a German composer who had a school of music, and he said, I only want children who have not yet learned to read and write. It was sort of a boarding school. Don't bring children who already know to read and write, because something has already happened to the mind. We all know, have read enough about and have witnessed it ourselves, what happens when the intellect alone reigns supreme, without any emotions, without any feelings. When it is divided or separated and cultivated, like one cultivates or breeds a horse just for running. One can breed supreme creatures that way. And this is sometimes how it seems the intellect is being bred to fit into a technologically oriented society at the expense of feelings, emotions, the heart. Who ever heard of a heart in school? I'm not saying that teachers don't have a heart, but it's not on the curriculum. Yeah, you laugh, and this is, yeah, it would be ridiculous. I mean, it's sentimental. And if we do concern ourselves with it, we do it sentimentally, out of ideas. Got to do something for the heart. Send a greeting card to someone. It's already printed. Because there's no fullness in my heart that I can write the card myself. I haven't learned that in school. It's never been on the agenda to write out of the fullness of your heart. Now, some of you will say, well, I have a teacher, I know a school where this goes on. I'm glad that it is going on someplace, and there are a few schools whose sole objective is to bring about a complete human being. And therefore the teachers also look into themselves, whether they are into their partiality, into their cut-upness. And together with the children, maybe something will come into being that's whole. But most of the schools are not concerned with this. They're concerned with curriculum and exams, training, accumulating knowledge, information that can be fed back at any time. And what happens to the heart? What happens to the feelings, to the emotions? It is amazing how many people tell me in meetings, particularly when they come here at first, I'm not in touch. I don't even know what a feeling is. Or I can deal with things intellectually, but I cannot deal with my emotions. Either I explode, which I hate myself for afterwards, or I keep it under control, and it's better really this way. It's really better. But the keeping under control is the very thing that brings about the explosion. That's why it's so important here in sitting in a retreat when anger does well up to look at it, to feel it. And don't ask me, how do I do that? If you say, how do I do it, then you're again concerned with, how do I do it? Intellectually trying to grasp a method, which is an escape from this thing that's seething there and simmering and broiling. It can be felt. You, everybody can feel it. If you don't think you have to have a special capacity to do it, if it is pointed out that it is not dangerous to do this, it is not bad or immoral or negative to be in touch with, quote, negative, unquote, emotions. It's the only way they can come into awareness and clarify and maybe dissipate without any control. Until we do this, we are parts. The intellect, the heart, shriveled up in most people. Or is it? Or isn't it? Meaning feeling sorrow of other people. And love. It's not just strictly personal. My love for you. Is that love even? Or is that what I like to experience in your presence? Pleasant feelings, self-assurance, energy, all this momentary abandonment of any feeling of separation. And then I want that again. That's what I call my personal love for you. It would be better called by what it is than this word love. That word may not apply. Because when you do not give this to me anymore, when you're not interested in me anymore, then where is my love? Turns into hatred very often. Or anger, or jealousy. And if that happens, am I in touch with it? Or do I feel guilty and ashamed over it, or self-righteous about it? Which means always the operation of thinking about it, rather than feeling it. Feeling the body on fire with it. The body-mind on fire with it. Without any excuse, not wallowing in expressing it, then that's not what we're calling being in touch with it. Being in touch with it has this awareness, which is totally non-judgmental. Not opposing and not escaping. The intellect, the heart, the emotions. When there are emotions without intellect, which means intelligent thinking, then stupid things are done and said, just out of the outpour of anger. And one doesn't think about the situation clearly, factually. So is it possible that intellect, heart, emotions, feelings, that this all works harmoniously together? Works together? In thinking not to cut out the feelings, because they're irrelevant, they're kids' stuff or women's stuff or whatever. Or they hinder me. A man like Eichmann couldn't possibly have allowed emotions and heart to participate in the job. He would have never done it. He was trained not to do that. And that's why he could do it. People who constantly get into emotional fight and argument, why not let in some intelligent thinking? Not at the moment of the emotional fight, then all chemical and whatever systems in the body are go. But maybe afterwards, so that one thinks about what is going on. I'm not saying it, sees it, because it's all right to think it through too, intelligently, taking all sides into consideration, everything that's going on, together. You can do that together. And then maybe you'll see something together. Because another big part of this me is the body, and that is cut up into infinite parts. Here, the head, the shoulders, the arms, the legs, and the tail in this koan. If you look through the register of medical specialists, you see how many parts we can cut up the body into. And it is true, it is not just a saying, that when you go to one specialist and you inquire about something else that you even have the feeling may have to do with it, he says, sorry, you got to see so-and-so about that. Because it's not just turning you away out of disinterest, but the feelings, I don't have the training for that. Someone else has a better training for that. I would be irresponsible if I consider the hand while I'm considering the heart, or vice versa. But ourselves, as you're sitting, when the knees ache or the back kills you, do you call it back and you localize it? You have a picture in your mind of this thing back there, or these two things in front, which you call knees? Or do you allow this pain, which you don't call pain, to permeate wherever it wants to permeate? Allow it to be what it is, and you don't know what it is. You don't separate it from the whole. You don't separate it from this question that you're working on, who or what is it, or mu, or attending. Because the aching knees is also the breathing, it's also the sitting, and it's also the birds outside. But if you name each of these and localize them, then you have split it all into little segments, which you think have nothing to do with each other. And then there's this pain of separation, which is the greatest pain a human being can suffer. The head, the arms, the chest, the back, the buttocks, the legs, knees, feet. What is it? The ears, the eyes, the nose, you have no word for it, if you don't label it, what is it? Hearing, touching, seeing, smelling. If you don't name it, what is it? Remember, we used to chant, no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, color, sound, smell, taste, touch, or what the mind takes hold of. Meaning what I label, what I know from memory, what I have an image of in my mind. With that, my whole being is cut up and cut asunder. Because what I see, I label, and what I have labeled, I either like or don't like, reject or clutch. And with that, the seeing becomes different from the hearing. What I hear, I like or don't like. I first name, oh, that's these dogs barking again. I don't like it. They disturb me. Sometimes it's said in Zen language, which is it has its special language. Seeing with the ears and hearing with the eyes. Meaning all senses harmoniously working together, unseparated by like and dislike, which comes from memory, and which may be totally inappropriate to the present new situation. Looking into oneself, as we're doing in a retreat, and as we've talked about every time we open the mouth, are all these images of myself. Maybe in the course of these days you've come across them, you've seen some of them. Being this, being that, and those two being antagonistic to each other. Wanting to be loving and kind, having an image of me being a loving, kind person, and then hating the noise that the person next to me makes. But you don't like to be that way, so there's a conflict. One person said, it's so confusing. I'm so down on myself. I'm just so totally negative and self-deprecating about myself. Well, there is, again, two entities. The one who is doing all these condemnable things, and then the one who condemns. There's a split into two there. And yet, looking at you, I only see one. I don't see two. It all happens in your brain, which has this capacity to create the feeling of there is a me that knows, and the me that is dumb, and the knowing me condemns the dumb me. And what comes out of it? More confusion. Maybe temporary control of the smart me, with all its pride and separation from other people who aren't quite so smart, or so effective in controlling themselves. Again, separation and division. The other thing this person brought up, saying that there are all these different levels of consciousness. Superficial consciousness, and then what's subconscious and the unconscious. And she said, I had this dream, this scary, dreadful, nightmarish dream. What does that have to do with the birds singing outside? You know, if there's attention, gentle attention, which knows of no condemnation, of no moral standards, traditional standards whatsoever, then can one listen to the dream or the fear that bubbles up from what is called the unconscious mind as one listens to the bird. Neither moving toward nor moving away. It's not called for. Attention is here. Is the koan calling for apartheid, apartness, or for seeing the parts with a mind that is whole? What is wholeness? What is wholeness? In which parts may be seen, but not judged and not gotten entangled in, but seen very clearly. The part cannot see the whole. We said that in the beginning. The part can only see whatever is interesting and important to the part. And so it finds a part that it can zero in on and occupy itself with. Part here being the me, maybe with a dominating intellect, dominating emotions. What is wholeness? You know, wholeness, the word whole, is also the same word as holiness. They're not two different words. Maybe they're not two different things. Not the holiness that is created by the part, in images and sculptures, and buildings. A wholeness is not manufactured. It's not made. It's there or it isn't there. It's there when the part is quiet. With no need to assure itself, to save itself, to prove itself, to enlarge itself or efface itself. When we say part, we're referring to the me. Is wholeness just an idea, a concept? Or has there been a glimpse of it Not a glimpse of wholeness, but an instant in which there was, or is, no me. To divide things up, to sever things that are in truth unseverable. What is wholeness? Which is holiness. Here this poem said, you may describe it, but in vain. Picture it, but to no avail. When the world collapses, it says, it is indestructible. When you hear that, you find something latching onto that last sentence. It sounds kind of hopeful. Something indestructible. If I found that, then maybe I would be indestructible. But that's the part, thinking and hoping and fearing. Because destruction is part of the whole. Destruction and death and dying is also the whole. Can you see that? And live it. We will end here for today.